Hey, it's TDA and welcome to this step-by-step guide on Desynced. I'll be showing you step-by-step throughout the progress of the entire game, what to build in what order, little tips and tricks to make sure your base runs smoothly, how to organize your base in such a way that things don't come to a grinding halt, how you are able to find things, etc, etc. That means this video is probably going to be on the longer side, but I do think that is a very useful thing for you to find out how this game works, because this game is pretty complicated if you first start playing it. Now, before you start a game, make sure you do not let the resource richness sit on medium. You definitely want to put it at least on high, but maybe even on infinitely rich, because right now you will run out of some of the basic resources pretty quickly if you let it sit on medium. So make sure you do that before you get into the game. Once you get into the game, deploy your base anywhere that is close to both crystals as well as iron and, well, metal ore it's actually called. Doesn't really matter where exactly, just leave yourself some room to build. Your command center is going to start out with a fabricator and a small turret. You can ignore the turret for now, but put the fabricator into one of the medium slots and set it to produce metal bars like this. Now you can produce an infinite amount of that. This is not going to do anything by itself. In order to actually make this work, let's assign both our scouts, the ones with the little mining tools on them. Let's assign those to the metal ore. They'll start mining, and then the third one that doesn't actually have anything equipped on it will automatically start carrying the mined resources to your command center, and you'll start producing some metal bars. Once you have at least 10 of those, switch the production for a moment to the fabricator itself, so you make a second one, and once you have that, plug that into the second slot and set the first slot back to producing metal bars. Now the second one you want producing metal plates, because that's the new item that you're going to need. While you're producing those metal plates, switch one of your miners to the crystals for a moment, so you can also get some of those, because what we're aiming for is the crafting of an assembler. And in order to make an assembler, we're going to need 10 crystals as well as 5 iron plates. So once you have those, switch your production back to an assembler, and as soon as that is ready, slot that into the second slot instead of the fabricator that is there right now. Now, once you have that assembler up and running, there's a couple of things happening. The game is going to suggest you that you build an uplink, but we're not going to do that just yet, and we also currently are not producing plates anymore, so let's go and fix that. If you go to the build menu, you will see this by default. These are the default things where you can build everything from scratch. It's a little tedious if you do that, but you also have unlocked one of the prefabs. Now you can actually make these yourself, and I'll show you that in a moment, but for now just build the metal one and build it somewhere close to your building. Now what this is going to do, this is going to put down a basic structure, including one fabricator, and you should have all the materials ready to go. This should build it pretty fast. And once you open it up, it should be set by default to production of metal bars. Now that means we're now producing metal bars over here, so you can switch this to the metal plates instead. And now we're basically producing everything partially outside of our production facility and partially inside. This is nice and all, but of course we're going to have to expand a lot further upon this. Now, if you hover over your recipe and you press the Alt button, you can actually see how much you would need in order for this metal plate recipe to run constantly. You need one of these fabricators producing metal plates. You need 1.3 of these fabricators making metal bars, and you're going to need 2 miners mining metal all the time. That's not quite what we have, and we also want to remove all our production from our main facility because we're going to use this to expand. So we're going to move all of this externally. Now, how do we do that? Well, first of all, we're going to be removing the prefab production that we just got unlocked. Just remove this one because you don't want a dedicated recipe for everything else. Instead, just press the +1 on this bottom thing over here, select the 1x1 building and put a fabricator in here. Don't put a recipe or anything else. You don't need to do anything else than that. Just give it a name, something like basic fabricator, and then you're done. Now, if you go now to the menu in the prefabs, you will see this basic fabricator that we just built, and you can just place that down like this, and then place maybe another one down a couple of rows over, because what we're also going to do is we're going to add another prefab just because that's handy. This is going to be a very basic one. It's actually in the default as well, but we're just going to build a storage block. This is going to be basic storage, like so. Now the only reason I'm adding this prefab to it is for a simple reason that it's in the same menu now and it's easier to find. Now this will take a moment to build, but you want to make sure you prioritize the actual construction centers. And we are also going to have to make a couple of these fabricators because otherwise we won't actually be able to build this. We're going to need a total of 2 more because we need 1 for this one and 1 for this one. And well, it'll take a moment for all of this to be built, but you will get that soon enough. However, in order to speed this up, I do recommend that you turn off the iron plate production for a moment because we don't actually need iron plates for any of this, and otherwise a lot of the resources will go into here. We're going to get a lot of plates, but that's actually not going to be useful for a moment. For the same reason, if you haven't already done so, you might also want to address your second scout back to the metal ore instead of the crystals, because again, we don't necessarily need a lot of crystals right now. But yeah, then you should have something like this. Now, this fabricator is also going to produce metal ore, but rather than doing this manually, I'm going to show you how you can do this easily. Press C while you have this one selected, and then press V while you have this one selected, or at least hovering over that. You don't even have to select it, and it will copy the recipe straight to that. Now, of course, it's not a big deal to do this when we're talking these small numbers right now, but when you get later into the game, basically copy pasting makes this a lot easier. For the same reason, you still have to do this manually because I don't actually have a recipe to paste over here, but this is going to be producing our metal plates. Now, another good habit to get into really early into the game is basically making sure that you're not stacking up your production inside the facilities themselves, but actually in a storage unit. So select these two metal productions facilities, press Ctrl and then right click on the basic storage right next to that. This will make sure this scout is now dumping all the metal bars in here. And that just makes it a lot more easy to basically get a stockpile of that. For the same reason, select this one and press right click with Control, press down when you're hovering over this, and all the metal plates will be going into this basic storage. Just make sure you are always producing until the storage is completely full. With that out of the way, we are now ready to actually ramp up our production a little bit because our miners over here are not going to be able to cope. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a total of 3 more miners. And in order to do that, we're going to need these miner components. So we're going to make 3 of those. And we're also going to make a second assembler because we're going to need more advanced stuff in here as well. Now we're going to need some more miners in order to actually make this production facility run optimally, and luckily with these assemblers we can actually make those. However, rather than just queuing these up manually, making some circuit boards and stuff like that, I'm going to show you a more intelligent way, more effective way of doing that in this game. So go back to your prefabs, make a new folder, at least I recommend that you do because you're going to want to have a bit of organization going. Make a new bot over here, make it just a simple worker. Do not use the laser mining tool. This is what your current bots have, but you can't actually make these. Make sure you put a normal miner tool on top of this. And there you go, we have a small little worker bee. We're going to call this a basic mining bot. And I'm just going to remind myself this is actually a worker. And that's all there is to it. Make sure you don't press this. This will automatically link it to the network and then it will start running around, really annoying. So I recommend that you leave this off so you can actually control what your robots do. If there's any prefabs already in your overview, because the tutorial I think unlocks a couple of these, make sure you delete them again because these actually come, or you can edit them. I actually don't think you can edit them, so just delete them and make them again. They actually start hooked up to the network already, and like I said, that's really annoying. Now when you go back to your assembler, you should find your blueprint over here and you can queue that up. We're going to need, let's say, 3 to mine over here and 1 to mine over here. We also want to replace our scouts with more basic miners because these scouts are really fast, so they make very useful worker bees that fly around and transport all our stuff rather than just sitting there and mining. And so that means we're going to want to make 4 of these. Now you'll see that you're going to need some circuit boards, or you're going to need the mining tools that go on top of here because we didn't construct these either. Now you can queue these up in the assembler, but there's a more intelligent way of doing this, And if you drag this, if you click here and you drag this to this position over here, then it will actually automatically tell this assembler, hey, I need some circuit boards, can you make those for me? The answer is yes. So this will start producing circuit boards if you don't have them being carried to your command center already. It will also say, well, I also need a miner, can you make that as well? Yes, I can. And as you can see, I don't have to do anything. This is completely done for me, completely automated, kind of with a basic version of AI working in our advantage here. Once the first two are built, I recommend that you bring your scouts out here for a moment and that you switch the tools from the scout to the ones that you just built. Like so. Just put the ones that you already built back into the command center. You are going to build a lot more miners, and this way you will have the upgraded mining tools, the two that you start with at least, on your units available, and well, that's just an easier way to get going. Now send 3 of your workers to the miners over here, and then the last one is going to mine some crystals. Now there's a couple of things to note about these miners. Make sure they're actually connected to the network, otherwise these won't actually be serviced by the other bots. And make sure that you set them up correctly, because right now if I send them away, for example like this, they will completely forget what they're doing and not go back to work. If you do that by accident, it can really mess up your production chain and cause you some headaches. Now the way to solve that is use this signal over here, click this, set this to metal ore. This won't actually do anything by itself, but this will just tell this like, hey, metal ore is a good thing. Now, if you drag this to this will actually link that signal to metal ore and actively tell this thing to start mining metal ore. So if I now send it away, it will wait here for a moment and not actually do anything. Why not? Because there's no space in the inventory. So that is a bad example. But if I now tell it to bring its storage somewhere, it should now, like you can see, go straight back to work. So if I now move it around, again, it will go straight back to work. Now you can actually copy paste this setting as well. The problem with copy pasting in this case is that this actually has a different type of tool. So I'll just need to do it manually once again. But you get to just do it like this, tell the signal to go over here. And then with the second one, these two are actually identical. I can just copy, paste, and now this one will have that setting as well. Last but not least, build another basic storage at the start of this chain, just so we have somewhere for all of this ore to be delivered. Now actually, right now you can see how much ore is in here, and the reason is that because I forgot to set this to infinite, so the signal needs to be set as infinite, and now you can still see what is actually going on here, so don't forget to do that. But the reason I wanted to build this storage is now we can select all of them, press Ctrl, right click, and this will make sure that all the ore is going in here. Now right now that doesn't really do that too much, but this will be really helpful later on once we get to automate the entire chain. As a side note, you can actually set up all this signaling in the blueprint already like this. Basically just look at what you actually already programmed in the robot that you have and replicate that here. I don't recommend putting the signal to a specific ore already. Again, you want to make sure you get to decide what it's going to do before it actually does anything. But if you set it up like this with just empty slates, it's not going to be moving or doing anything just yet. Double check that all your robots are now connected to the network, and then it's time to finally start working on that uplink. Now again, this is going to need circuit boards, but this is going to tell the secondary assembler, hey, I need some circuit boards, go make some. Once you have the uplink available, just plug it into one of the 2 slots. This will mess up the nice little thing we had going over here for a moment, but that's not going to be a problem for long. What we're going to want to research when you press the T button is basic structures first. So just set that to research. You might want to queue up the basic power after that. This just requires some crystals, nothing complicated. And what you want to make sure is that the other thing is creating some circuit boards in the meanwhile. While we're waiting for the research to complete, let's also just duplicate this entire line. And as you can see, this is really easy to do now because we can actually just copy and paste. And like I said, this is really easy to set up like this. We don't actually have blueprints in the game yet where you can build an entire line, but this will do just fine. Now don't forget that you actually need to build 3 more miners as well in order for this to actually work. But other than that, this should be really efficient. Now, I also recommend setting the miners that you are going to build to deliver to this basic storage rather than this one, just to make sure that you know exactly which miners are dedicated to which part of the production chain. Also, don't forget that you will probably have to handcraft a couple of things like these fabricators, as well as the parts for the mining machines, because, well, they're not automatically being produced anymore since we messed up our dual setup over here. Don't worry, we're going to fix that in a moment. Just don't forget that you can still handcraft stuff if you want. At this point, whenever you find yourself waiting, this is probably a good opportunity to grab one of your scouts, disconnect it from the logistics network for a moment so it doesn't start running around, and do some exploring. Now, I have a building right in the middle of my base, but sometimes they're a little bit farther out, like this one over here, for example. Don't go too far out, you will encounter enemies. And if you right-click on one of the explorable units, you will find something that looks like this. Usually it's a puzzle combined with something you need to deliver, and then it should probably be done. Now, these puzzles are typically either one of these kind of things where you need to shift these around and connect everything up, or they're one of these puzzles where you click and then everything changes color. None of these are very complicated. They're just meant to give you something to do while you're waiting, basically. Now, the idea behind these types of puzzles, they're actually not that easy to solve. Is just go for the obvious route. So, for example, here in the corner, this is the obvious way to turn this. Here, this is how you should turn this. Now, this is only a straight through thing, so this is the only way I can connect this up, and so on. So this will kind of guide you how you should be positioning most of the things. Doesn't really matter how long it takes you to solve this. There's no time pressure really in this game, but just solve it, and once you do, you'll get some rewards. In case you're playing along with me, this is the solution to the first puzzle. I'll hold it here, pause the video if you need it. And of course you need to twist this around, and look, we get a free portable power field. Is this any good to us? No, not really, but it's free stuff anyway. Now, in order to get this, what you can do is just have your little robot over here request an item. Specifically in this case, we need one of these circuit boards. And look, our research is done. And once it has it, you can once again right-click on the thing, transfer the item, and you will, there you go, we will have some more rewards. In this case, we got, what was this? A behavior controller, the most overpowered thing in the game. We actually get our circuit board back. We get a deployer for a what? For a twin bot. Well, it's a nice upgraded bot that we can use. And we get a robotics cube, which we will need for the more complicated technologies. The way you use these deployers is actually plugging them into one of your bots and right-clicking it and say use, and it will show you where you can build it. For example, over here, it will now start constructing one of these robots, and that's it. We just get the one, but, well, look, we have a twin bot, a nice little large robot to help us out in our base. One small detail when you're copy-pasting facilities like this is that actually by default they're actually also going to incorporate the settings in terms of delivery. So right now this, because this is a copy of this one, is also delivering to this basic storage over here. Now, of course, it's easy to correct. It's not a huge thing if you forget, but it will make your base more inefficient if you don't do this. So make sure you adjust accordingly. And again, make sure that the new bots are also delivering to the correct storage and not to this one, if you're copying the behavior from one of the existing ones. With the research done, let's actually unplug the uplink for a moment and plug back in the assembler, and let's set this to making the reinforced plates. Now, the reason that we are duplicating this production facility is that this is actually the amount of stuff we need in order for this to be producing non-stop. Now, of course, we have clogged up our entire command center in terms of production, so we can't make anything new without turning anything else off. But we will be able to fix that now, because with the reinforced plates, we can actually now start making medium buildings that fit a medium slot, so we can move the assemblers outside of our main production building. The nice thing about these medium buildings is that they don't just fit an assembler, they also fit a fabricator in top of that as well, because they have another small socket. Of course, you can put anything else in here as well, but particularly this assembler fabricator combination is one we're going to use a lot, so I recommend that you make a basic blueprint for that as well. Let's place one of these down, and don't forget that by pressing R you can actually rotate the building as you want. I'm actually going to place it down over here. This will make sense in a moment, but don't forget that in order for this to be built, you actually need the assembler as well as the fabricator available, so build those if you don't already have them built and available. You may need to wait around a little bit, so that's a perfect moment to start exploring a little bit more, and in case you encounter the second type of puzzle, this is really easy to solve. So the way this works, whenever you click one of these things, it will change color of all the adjacent things, including in the diagonal direction. Now the way you solve this is you click each of the corners once in order like this, then you click the top middle one, the bottom middle one, then either one of the sides, and then the other sides in the middle, and then you're done. Now you have this building available, set the assembler to making the reinforced plates and the fabricator to make metal plates, and that means that we can actually turn this off for a moment so our production chain doesn't get interrupted, as well as turn this off so we're not overproducing anything of the late game materials, or later game materials at least, and messing up the supply of our lower grade materials. Now, something else I recommend that you do is to right click on the things that are in your inventory over here and fix the slot to this item. Because we're producing multiple things in the same building, this will make sure that there's always room available for these things. The remaining slot we don't actually need because we are using the bars as well as the plate to make reinforced plates, and we're also using bars for metal plates. So what we can actually do is select this one, fix this to an item, and make this sure that this is basically additional storage for the reinforced plates. Speaking of storage, make sure you make another storage place so this reinforced plates have somewhere to go. Make sure you also dedicate this to actually transport it to here. And then it's time to really start making our base a little bit more efficient than it already is. Now, if you do it like this, notice by default it will also start storing metal plates in this storage facility, which is not what we want. So rather than doing that, make sure you just lock all the slots to a specific item, preferably reinforced plates. You could leave 1 or 2 spaces open for the metal plates, but make sure the majority of the storage goes towards reinforced plates. Note that you don't have to go through this one by one. You can simply drag this over and it will copy the settings to all the different slots. And as you can see, that makes it really efficient to set up whatever organization you want in your specific storage facility. In order to do that, we're going to need some more text. So queue up the basic signals, followed by behavior, followed by power transfer, and followed by basic robotics. You can only queue up 3, but make sure you queue this up once one of these is done. And this will allow us to really take our base to the next level, like I just said, but also optimize a few more things that we haven't been able to do so until this point. Of course, don't forget to actually redeploy the uplink, otherwise you won't be doing any research. But after you've done that, make another worker, or pick one of the ones that you already have, but I recommend making a new one. And then also make a deconstructor and put it on your worker. Now this will actually allow you to remove buildings. The worker itself is not going to be deconstructing buildings all the time, so you can just connect it to the logistics network and have it move stuff around. But before you do that, I recommend you put it to a hotkey. So just press Ctrl 1, and this will set it to a group. And then as soon as you have it run around, if I don't misclick, if you have it run around, it will just start delivering stuff and basically make itself useful. But if you want to deconstruct anything ever again, just press the 1 button and it will automatically select the building or the item that you have selected to that. So right now, if I want to deconstruct anything, I can easily find where my worker used to be. And if I'm done deconstructing stuff, I can just let it do its thing. Other than removing your own buildings, you can actually also use this worker now to remove these ugly buildings that we have already solved and get them out of the way so we can expand our factory a little bit further. Now, while we're waiting for the research to complete, let's make sure we don't have to handcraft stuff all the time. So in order to do that, I made a new basic mall building. We're going to build a mall, and that will basically supply us with an automated way of getting all the parts that we need. For example, assemblers, fabricators, but also all the smaller parts that we need to fit in our machines as well as our buildings. Now, in order to do that, I set up a very simple recipe with a medium building with a single medium slot. I didn't actually put a fabricator in here. I only want this to produce one thing at a time anyway. And yeah, this is all there is to it. Let's place this down. Make sure you leave yourself some room and start making your first mall building. Now, this first mall building will be actually making assemblers, because as you can see, this requires assemblers and we had one to spare. But if we didn't, we would have to go back here, craft it, and that's just really annoying. So let's set this to making assemblers non-stop. Now, of course, this only has 2 slots available, so it's only going to make 2 assemblers. So to make sure we have a little bit more stockpile than that going on, let's put a storage unit behind it and make sure this is dedicated to deliver to the storage unit in order to make sure we have a stockpile of around 10 assemblers all the time. Don't go out just yet by building everything in the mall that you can already construct. Just stick to the basics for now, because you'll notice that you'll run out of resources really quick. So I recommend making the fabricators, the assemblers, as well as the mining tools. Now make sure that you put this to infinite, otherwise it will just make one and then stop constructing. That's not what you want. You want a constant supply of these whenever you use some of them up. This will allow you to basically make production buildings non-stop, as well as robots, and never have to worry about making the parts again. At this point, you're probably also going to run low on the crystals, so make sure you build about 4 of these miners making crystals, and remember that you can copy-paste the behavior by pressing C and V on the ones that you just constructed, and then they'll act exactly like the ones you already have. You'll probably notice you're running a negative power at some point now as well, and we are going to easily fix that because we have access to the more advanced power systems now. Let's make a little blueprint for that with 2 solar cells in the small slots in a single one. So we have this producing a total of 100 power as long as it's day. Now, usually it's day the majority of the time, so this is going to be producing 100 power almost non-stop. But just to make sure we also have some power during the night, we're actually going to fit in some of these capacitors. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? I'll forget what they look like. These things. These are going to charge up whenever you have excess power and then discharge whenever you need it. So if you also put these in here, this is actually going to, you only need to put in 1, but you can actually put in 2 if you want some extra buffer. These are going to be able to drain at a 75 rate. So in order to make sure you can actually produce the same 100 power that these will normally be producing, we need 2 of them. So we have a 150 drain rate at the max. So during the night, these will use the buffer that they build up during the day to make sure our factory keeps working around the clock. It's a very simple setup, and you don't need too many of these, but just keep an eye on your power. Whenever it dips into the negative, build a few of these. In order to make sure we can actually build these blueprints, extend the mall with both the solar cells as well as the capacitors, and again make a dedicated storage for that, just to make sure we are continuously building that. Now, aside from the fact that you can now start building those additional power units, you can also just put some of these power units in your actual mall, because we do have this small slot available to that, and some power that fits right in there. So why not use some of these slots if you're not using them for anything else? Similarly, you also have 2 empty slots for internal components. Why not put 1 or 2 capacitors in there as well, just to make sure you have some additional buffer. What you can actually do is you can go to your dedicated blueprint for this and actually slot those in, just so you don't forget to keep making use of all your slots whenever you build one of these simple facilities. There's a downside to upgrading your blueprint like this as well, because of course this does put an additional drain on your resources whenever you build these, because it's going to not build anything until you actually have all of these materials available. Depending on your preference, you might want to keep it simple and just manually upgrade it, or do it like I've done over here. It's completely up to you. I actually prefer doing it like this. It takes a little longer, but at least you don't have to think about this ever again. Now let's tidy up our base a little bit. Let's start by building a bit of a overflow junkyard, whatever you want to call it, and I recommend placing that somewhere near to your command center just so you know where to find it. Now, the reason I'm putting down 6 of these is that just to make sure that our junkyard doesn't fill up too quickly. Now, the easy way to make sure that doesn't happen is take your first storage, connect it to the second one, connect the second one to the third one, and just go around the clock like this, just so you make sure that there's always items being delivered to the last one. And you can basically put everything in this basic storage first, and then it will automatically be transferred down the line to this one. And as long as there's room anywhere and you put it in here, it will automatically sort out itself. As a side note, upgrading your storage units with the capacitor as well is an easy way to make sure you have even more free buffer power in case you need it. But again, do this only if you feel like you have enough production to support this whenever you're expanding. Now, this junkyard is only going to work manually for the moment. You can put in the random stuff like this, whatever we have available in our main command center, for example, that we've been storing up that we don't necessarily need there to be there. But dragging everything in here one by one is not going to be efficient. So let me show you how you can make that more efficient by automating that by upgrading our facility over here. Okay, so let's find our destructor bot by pressing 1 and removing it from the logistics network for a moment, otherwise it'll just keep running around. And let's destroy these buildings one by one. It will only take a second. And as you can see, we have all the stuff on the floor now. I recommend leaving the storage units alone for a moment. We'll remove those in a second, but let's make sure we have an alternative place for that stuff to go first. Now we had 2 fabricators making metal here, and we can actually replace that with a single building now with 2 fabricators on top of it. And on top of that, we're going to need to replace this metal plate facility over here. We're just basically moving that from here to here. And then finally, we need some storage again to make sure the metal plates have somewhere to go. There we go. Don't forget to set the recipes and link these things together. If you do link them together, make sure you lock the inputs so you always have room for the correct items to go somewhere. And again, make sure you make sure there's only the actual output that you want here in the output storage. And then we can remove these storage units as well as these access buildings that we have over here. Now this is going to leave us with a lot of stuff on the floor, and then we can actually try to manually move that into the storage, but that's going to be a lot of work and we want to automate that. In other words, what we need is a janitor. Now in order to make a janitor, just make a new worker and equip it with a behavior controller and a portable radar. Make those if you haven't already made them yet. Now the radar is going to help us look for trash. And what is trash? Well, in our definition, that is something that is a dropped item. That's what it's called in the game. And it's also going to be in the power grid. I don't want this robot to wander off in itself. So if you look for in power grid, you'll find that. Now, if it meets both these conditions, it will output an item over here. For example, as you can see, right now it is highlighting this dropped item over here because that's the closest one that is on the floor. Now, how do we tell the robot to pick it up and how do we tell it where to go? Now, this is where the behavior come in. You can modify the behavior over here, and if there's anything in here already, just remove that. We're going to have a couple of different input items. So we have one input item already, and we're going to rename that. Let's set that to the trash. And then we're going to need a second parameter to tell it where to go. So let's set that to the... Actually, let's make that the junkyard it's going to be assigned to. Now, what do we want you to do? Well, we want you to pick something up. And what do we want you to pick up? We want you to pick up the trash. We'll need to tell it what that trash actually is, but this is what it will do. It will move to that trash and go and pick that up. Now, on top of that, what we also want you to do is we want you to drop that off after you've picked that up. Where you want us to drop it off? Well, in the junkyard, like this. It's a very simple program, but it's actually quite effective. Now, of course, there's also going to be some movement back and forth, but this should already take care of that without us having to explicitly tell it to move somewhere. Okay, so now we've set that up. You can actually see the trash and junkyard variables coming in here. So which is the junkyard? That's going to be this one. Remember, this is the one that links to all the other ones. And what is the trash that we want you to pick up? Well, that's the dropped item that's coming from the radar. Now, it won't actually start working straight away for the very simple reason that we haven't started its behavior just yet. So if we press go, there you go. It just picked up the closest thing on the floor and it dropped it back in. It will actually pick up those random little small shards that are on the floor here and there as well, scattered resources like that. And it will all dump that in the basic storage yard. Now, it'll take it a while to actually clean everything up, but it will be vacuuming across the base and move things up. Now, every now and then it will not have the items that you want to be cleared up in the range. And you can solve that by just assigning this again to a hotkey. And that means it's very easy to find your janitor and send it to wherever you need something to be picked up. And of course, don't forget to name your little robot the janitor. Now, while the janitor is cleaning up our base, let's make a dedicated facility to make some circuit boards, because right now we're just producing that in our main building. That's not where we want to keep it. Now, I recommend making dedicated facilities to single things, for example, circuit boards in this case. And if you press Alt, you can actually see exactly what that facility should contain. So it needs one circuit board assembler, and in order to make that work, we're going to need 1.5 fabricators making plates. We're going to need 2 fabricators making the normal bars, and then we're going to need 3 miners mining the metal, and we're going to need about 2 miners mining the crystal. So let's put all of that in motion. There we go, isn't this beautiful? We have the base materials for the metal ore coming in here, then we're having these transformed into metal bars over here, then we have 2 smelters, or 2 fabricators I should say, making metal plates, one over here and one in the medium building, and then of course we are making the circuit boards over here and transporting that into here. Now this is actually doubling up as a storage place for the circuit boards as well as a receiving end for the crystal chunks. So all very neat, very organized. As you can see, I locked all of these storage units, so just to make sure that we don't get into any issue with things getting into the wrong place and then things backing up. And all in all, this should get a very steady production of circuit boards coming in. Now we're getting to the end of this early game guide, but I do want to point out a few more things just to help you get ready for the mid game. For one, we have access to a new type of robot, the Dashbot. This is actually a strict upgrade over the worker because it has a lot faster movement speed and it has twice the inventory space. Other than that, it's equivalent, it takes the same power and stuff like that, but it requires energized plate to make. So let's make sure we have some energized plate under construction. In order to make energized plate, we're going to need a robotics assembler, and in order to make a robotics assembler, let's just add that to our mall over here. Again, make sure you leave some space in between your mall segments, just so the bots have freedom to move around. Now this is also a good moment to make a blueprint for that. Considering the robotics things usually require 2 inputs and 1 output, initially you won't be able to fit more than 1 type of thing into one of these medium building because of the lack of storage space. So just copy, for example, the basic mall building that I have over here, like so, paste it from clipboard, and then you have like a symbol assembler with a solder cell in the second small thing, just to make sure we're utilizing the entire building, and then just replace that. Actually, need to take this out first, and then put a robotics assembler in there. Very simple, you don't necessarily need to do the copy pasting thing, but it's a very convenient way of doing things, I think, just to make sure you don't have to put in all the other pieces. And then a simple layout like this will do the trick. So we have a storage unit over here that is importing both the metal ore as well as the crystal chunks. And then the ore is going to go in this direction to be put into the bars and then into the metal plates as well as the reinforced plates. All of that is going to go into the robotics facility over here, where I reserved some space for the output as well as the input, just to make sure we can actually link everything together without the slots being confused. Now this is also where the crystal chunks are being deployed. And then of course finally this is being redeployed into here, and this should be the output for the energized plating. This is also a good moment to maybe set up some additional power stations that we made the blueprint for earlier, just in case you need the power. Of course for me right now it's night, so this is why I'm a little bit low on power, but there's no such thing as having too much power. So remember, if you want to craft multiple buildings like I'm doing over here, pressing shift while you're placing them down actually allows you to place down multiples of the same building. This is also a good moment to expand your mall. You don't necessarily need to do this all at once like I'm doing over here. Typically that's actually really inefficient because, as you can see, it's now spreading all the resources across all the different buildings. You can actually change that by prioritizing a site, but honestly just building it one by one is probably the more convenient way to do this. Now I actually recommend just building things in your mall or extending your mall whenever you find that you need an item that you're not currently already producing in your mall. That's a very natural way to make sure that you always have the buildings that you actually need in your mall. Also remember that when you're expanding your production, the game will actually try to make all of these buildings for a little while, and that will make sure that you have a very heavy drain on your resource. Now that's temporary, that doesn't mean you need to triple up on your production, although you can. It's just going to mean you're really low in production, and that also happens if you try to expand too fast. It'll take a little time for your mall as well as your other production to catch up. So don't worry about that too much. That's a perfect time, again, to go exploring and do some of that stuff while the base takes care of itself. Speaking of the base, there's 2 last things I want to mention before we wrap up. I recommend moving your uplink outside of your main command center. Now this is just a personal preference thing, but this will make sure that everything that has to do with science is just done externally, and you can basically produce whatever you want in your main building. It's a really efficient way to have the space and room to really progress here without having to worry about this science building getting in the way. Now this wouldn't be an automation game or a factory game if you couldn't pave the world in concrete, and actually in this game, if you do that, you just go out to the build menu and you say, hey, let's put foundations everywhere, What typically happens is that your entire factory comes to a standstill because all the little worker robots are going to try and place those foundations all over. It makes sense that they do that, but it's not typically really efficient. So the way we're going to solve that issue is making a paver bot. Now you need a dashbot for this because you do need 2 storage units, and I'll show you why in a moment, because we are going to place a smelter on top of this. Yes, you can fit a smelter on top, or it's not a smelter, it's a fabricator, but you get the idea. We're going to set this to make an infinite amount of foundations. Now, we're actually not going to connect this to the normal logistics network, we're going to set this to channel 2. The reason we're putting this to channel 2, everyone else is on channel 1, so this allows this dashbot to communicate with the network, but not communicate to any of the other robots. Now, once we do this, we power it up, you will see it actually does nothing because it has no way to find any metal bar. So what you need to do is find any metal bar production, go to the logistics network once again and put this on channel 2 as well. Now, as you can see, the dashboard is now running off to this one and grabbing what it needs from there, and now it's making those foundations. Now, if I now queue up my foundations and I do something stupid like paving this entire area within foundations, not really useful, but as you can see, all the other robots are just going to keep doing what they're doing, and this little robot is going to pave the way one by one. It'll take a little while, but at least the rest of your factory is still working. Now, of course, it will run out of these foundations after a little while, so it needs to run back to this metal bar production and pick up some new metal bars. But this is a fairly efficient way of doing this, and it just makes sure, once again, that your entire factory keeps working. One final note, you might want to double up on your circuit board production. It just smooths out the expansion a little bit, because pretty much every building in your mall at this point needs circuit boards, so just having the single assembler is probably not going to cut it if you want to expand at some decent speed. So depends on your personal preference. You can also, of course, set the assembler in your command center to produce some circuit boards when you're idling. Remember, you can also hook these things up together like I've done before in this episode. So, for example, when you're making a bot, it will actually queue up anything that you're lacking. It's completely up to you, but this is definitely the bottleneck at this stage of the game, so doubling up on the production will solve most of that. And there you have it, a very efficient, organized starting base that allows you to progress further into the game. Now, with all the tips and tricks that I've shown you so far, you can actually complete the entire game. But in the next episode, I will show you some more advanced stuff that you can or cannot use, or you can use it, but you don't necessarily need to. But it's good to know that those are the things that this game can actually do, because the whole programming thing is really unique to this game, and I do think it's really well, although it is a little bit daunting at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not all that bad. So if you're interested in that, make sure you join me for the next episode as well. Like and subscribe to all the YouTuber things that do really help me out. Hope you enjoyed this one. Leave any comments if you have any tips and tricks of yourself that I should mention in the next video, and for now, I do hope to catch you in the next one.